My name is Sarah McLean, and I have been doing search and rescue work in the Cascade Mountains for 14 years. During that time, I have rescued lost hikers from places they should never have been, talked to people suffering from hypothermia through crackling radios, and carried bodies down from the mountains when we arrived too late. After enough seasons, you develop a certain relationship with these mountains. It's a feeling of respect, bordering on fear, because you've seen what happens when that respect isn't mutual. I've seen broken ankles turn into fatal hypothermia because darkness fell too quickly. I've found experienced climbers who made one small mistake that cascaded into catastrophe. I've carried children down from ledges where they'd been stranded for hours, their parents waiting below in states of terror I hope never to experience myself. The mountains are indifferent to human suffering, and that indifference is perhaps their most terrifying quality. But nothing in those 14 years prepared me for what we encountered on Mount Defiance that October. Not the discovery itself, not the way our own operations slowly unraveled, and certainly not the realization that sometimes the thing you're searching for has been watching you the entire time. What happened on that mountain changed how I understand my job, changed what I believe is possible in these wilderness areas, and changed me in ways I'm still trying to process months later. The call came through dispatch at 4:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I remember the exact time because I was staring at my alarm clock, willing myself to get up for my regular training run, when my phone lit up with the emergency tone that bypasses all do not disturb settings. 3 hikers, college students from Portland, had failed to return from what was supposed to be a straightforward day hike on the Mount Defiance trail system. Their vehicle, a silver Honda CR-V, had been found in the trailhead parking lot well past the posted overnight restriction. Inside the vehicle, dispatch found their detailed itinerary posted on the dashboard exactly as recommended in our trail safety guidelines. Estimated return time, 6 p.m. Monday. Current time, nearly 11 hours overdue. I was pulling on my gear while still on the phone with dispatch, my mind already running through protocols and possibilities. 11 hours overdue, on a well-marked trail, suggested either injury serious enough to prevent movement or a navigational error significant enough to have taken them completely off course. Neither scenario was good, but both were survivable with prompt response. The initial assessment seemed routine enough to give me that familiar pre-operation tension rather than genuine alarm. 3 experienced hikers. Their permits showed this wasn't their first backcountry trip, with proper equipment based on the gear receipts found in their vehicle, hiking a well-marked trail system in clear weather. Statistically, we'd probably find them embarrassed and dehydrated, having taken a wrong turn in fading light and decided to camp rather than risk navigating in darkness. I'd conducted dozens of these operations that ended with relieved families and sheepish hikers, promising to be more careful next time. That's what I told myself during the drive to the ranger station. That's what I wanted to believe while reviewing the topographic maps spread across the briefing table, tracing the red line of the Mount Defiance Trail with my finger. Elevation gain of 4,800 feet, over 6.8 miles. Moderate difficulty. Popular enough that other hikers should have noticed if something was obviously wrong. The trail had been maintained just 6 weeks prior. The ranger confirmed this, showing me the work order logs. No reported hazards, no weather events, no recent wildlife incidents. Everything pointed to a standard extraction. But there was something in the air that morning that felt off, and I've learned over the years to trust that instinct, even when I can't articulate why. You spend enough time in the mountains and you develop an almost supernatural sense for when conditions aren't quite right, even when all the measurable data says otherwise. The barometric pressure was stable. The weather forecast showed clear skies for the next 72 hours. The temperature was seasonally appropriate, hovering in the low 40s at elevation. Everything was perfect on paper, but the weight in my gut suggested otherwise. It was the same feeling I'd had 3 years ago, before we found that experienced climber who'd fallen into a crevasse. A prickly sense of wrongness that defied logical explanation. My team that morning consisted of 4 people, including myself. Jake Turner, our primary tracker, had been working search and rescue for 8 years and could read terrain like some people read books. He was ex-military, Army Rangers, though he rarely talked about his service. Methodical, and had never once panicked in a crisis situation. Those qualities made him invaluable on operations like this. I'd seen Jake maintain absolute calm while talking a hypothermic hiker through a blizzard, his voice steady and reassuring even when I could see the worry in his eyes. If there were tracks to find, Jake would find them. Then there was Brandon Ortiz, younger and less experienced at 26, but enthusiastic and fit enough to handle the demanding physical requirements of mountain rescue. This was his first season with our team, but he'd proven himself reliable in the half-dozen operations he'd participated in. He had that eager energy that reminded me of myself when I first started, asking questions, absorbing information, genuinely excited to be learning this work. His youth meant he could carry more gear for longer distances, which made him valuable on extended operations. And finally, Emily Chen, our communications specialist and medic, who could navigate the radio systems better than anyone I'd worked with and had enough emergency medical training to stabilize injuries in the field. Emily was methodical, careful, and had a calming presence that helped keep anxious rescued hikers from panicking. She'd been doing this work for 6 years and had saved at least 3 lives with her quick medical interventions when minutes mattered. We were a good team. We'd trained together, worked together, trusted each other. That trust would be tested in ways none of us anticipated. We loaded the trucks with standard extraction gear, medical supplies, including trauma kits and thermal management equipment, rope systems rated for technical rescue, thermal blankets, high-calorie emergency rations, portable shelters, and enough communication equipment to maintain contact with base operations throughout the search. I double-checked the equipment personally, a habit I'd developed after a radio failure nearly cost us a rescue 5 years ago. Everything was functioning perfectly. Batteries fully charged, GPS units calibrated, emergency beacons tested and operational. The plan was straightforward. Follow the hiker's documented route, check the known camping areas and water sources, and deploy GPS beacons to triangulate if we picked up any signals from their emergency locators. Standard search protocol executed hundreds of times with predictable results. We'd be on the mountain by 6:30 a.m., reach the summit by noon if necessary, and have everyone back at the trailhead by late afternoon. Home for dinner, paperwork filed, families reunited. That was the plan. The drive to the Mount Defiance trailhead took 40 minutes through dense forest that was just beginning to show the muted colors of autumn. The road wound through corridors of Douglas fir and western red cedar, their trunks massive and ancient, their branches creating a canopy so thick that even in full daylight, the forest floor remained shadowed. The sun was rising behind us, painting the eastern sky in shades of amber and rose. But ahead of us, the mountains remained dark and foreboding. Shadows clung to the peaks like something alive, something reluctant to release its hold even as daylight strengthened. The temperature had dropped overnight. I could see frost forming on the edges of the road, where shadows lingered, and our breath misted in the cold morning air as we parked and began our final equipment check. The parking lot held only one other vehicle besides the missing hiker's CR5, an older pickup truck with local plates, probably belonging to a trail runner who'd started early to beat the afternoon heat. Nothing unusual there. Jake was examining the trail registry while I radioed base to confirm our departure. The registry was a simple logbook kept in a weatherproof box at the trailhead where hikers could record their plans and expected return times. It was voluntary and therefore incomplete, but sometimes useful for reconstructing timelines. "They signed in at 7:23 a.m. yesterday," he called out, showing me the entry. 3 names written in careful handwriting: Marcus Webb, Jennifer Coughlin, and Tyler Bennett. Their stated objective was the summit of Mount Defiance with an estimated return by 6 p.m. Standard day hike timing for moderately fit hikers maintaining a reasonable pace. "Anyone sign in after them?" I asked, moving to examine the registry myself. 2 solo hikers, both later in the morning. One signed out at 4:15 p.m., the other at 5:30 p.m. Jake's finger traced the entries, and I could see his frown deepening. Neither reported seeing the college students on their way down. That's odd, actually. The trail isn't that long or complicated. If these 3 were moving at a reasonable pace, they should have passed at least one of those solo hikers either going up or coming down. "Maybe they took a different route on the descent," Brandon suggested, shouldering his pack. "Lots of people do loops to avoid retracing their steps. Makes the hike more interesting." "Not on Mount Defiance," Emily said, studying the map she'd spread across the hood of our truck. "There's really only one main trail to the summit. You can technically descend via the Starvation Ridge Trail, but that adds significant mileage and difficulty, probably another 4 miles, and it's much steeper, more technical. Most day hikers stick to the standard out and back route. I've hiked this trail a dozen times, and I've never seen anyone attempt the loop unless they were specifically training for something." I examined the 2 solo hikers' entries more carefully. Both had noted "summit reached" in their comments, and both had provided expected return times that they'd met. Experienced hikers, then, who knew their pace and capabilities. If they'd been on the trail during the time our missing 3 should have been descending, the lack of visual contact was concerning. "Could they have left the trail?" Brandon asked. "Maybe went exploring off trail and got lost?" "Possible," Jake said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "But these 3 listed emergency beacons in their gear. If they got lost or injured, they should have activated them. That's what those devices are for." I keyed my radio, establishing contact with base operations. "Base, this is SARE Team 1. We're beginning ascent at 0630 hours. We'll provide status updates every 30 minutes as planned. Estimated time to first checkpoint is 90 minutes. Conditions are clear. Temperature approximately 42 degrees and rising. Team is equipped and ready." "Copy that, Team 1. Came the dispatcher's voice, clear and professional. "Weather remains clear with no predicted changes, no reported trail closures or hazards in your operational area. Be advised, we've attempted to contact the missing hikers' emergency contacts. Families confirm all 3 were experienced hikers with appropriate gear. No medical conditions or special circumstances noted. All 3 have prior backcountry experience." That was good information. Experienced hikers were less likely to make fatal errors, but they were also more likely to push beyond safe limits because they overestimated their capabilities. The line between confidence and overconfidence was thin and sometimes invisible until you'd crossed it. We started up the trail in a standard search formation with Jake in the lead, his eyes scanning the ground for any signs of recent passage. Brandon followed about 10 yards behind, carrying most of the heavy equipment. Emily was third, monitoring radio communications and environmental conditions. I brought up the rear, maintaining overall situational awareness and making sure we didn't miss anything important. The Mount Defiance Trail begins relatively gently, winding through old-growth Douglas fir and western red cedar that must have been standing when Lewis and Clark passed through this region. The trees were enormous, their trunks too wide for 3 people to wrap their arms around, their heights disappearing into the canopy above. The filtered early morning light gave everything a greenish, underwater quality. The ground was soft with decades of accumulated needles, and the air smelled of pitch and damp earth and something else. Something organic and ancient that you only smell in forests that have never been fully logged. For the first hour, everything proceeded normally. We moved at a steady pace, not rushing but making good time. Jake occasionally stopped to examine broken branches or disturbed ground cover, confirming that people had passed this way recently. Though whether it was our missing hikers or the solo hikers from yesterday was impossible to determine with certainty. The trail was well maintained and clearly marked, with regular signposts indicating distance and elevation. Every 30 minutes I radioed our position and status to base. Everything by the book, everything normal. The first oddity came at the 30-minute mark, elevation 2,400 feet. Emily noticed it first. Is it just me, or is this forest unusually quiet? I paused, listening. She was right. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, no insect sounds, nothing but the whisper of wind through the high branches and our own breathing and footsteps. Forest this old and dense should have been full of life, especially in the morning when animals were most active. Predator nearby, maybe, Jake suggested. Mountain lion or bear, that'll silence the smaller animals. Maybe, Emily said, but she looked uncertain. It just feels off, like even the trees are holding their breath. It was an unsettling observation, made more unsettling because I felt it too. There was a quality to the silence that went beyond mere absence of sound. It felt expectant, like the forest itself was waiting for something to happen. We continued upward, and the silence persisted. Brandon tried to lighten the mood with a story about his first overnight backpacking trip, when he'd convinced himself every sound was a bear and had barely slept. But even his usually infectious enthusiasm felt muted by the oppressive quiet. At 8 a.m. we reached the first major viewpoint, a rocky outcropping that offered clear sightlines down into the valley and across to neighboring peaks. This was a common rest stop, marked on the trail map as a scenic overlook. The morning sun was fully up now, burning off the last of the valley fog, and the view was spectacular. Layers of ridges receding into blue distance, the valley below looking miniature and perfect, like a model railroad layout. We found evidence of recent use. Protein bar wrappers wedged into rocks to prevent them from blowing away, water bottle caps, a few pieces of trail mix scattered on the ground, and more concerning, a small pile of cigarette butts that looked fairly fresh, no more than a day or two old. None of the missing hikers' gear lists included cigarettes or tobacco products, Emily noted, photographing the site methodically. Could be from other hikers, or could indicate they met someone else on the trail. Or they picked up the habit their parents don't know about, Brandon said, but he didn't sound convinced even as he said it. Jake was examining the ground near the viewpoint's edge, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Sarah, look at this. I moved to where he was crouching. The rocky surface showed scuff marks, the kind left by hiking boots scrambling for purchase. But what concerned me was the pattern. The marks suggested someone had been standing very close to the edge, closer than any sensible person would stand at a viewpoint, with a 300-foot drop to rocky ground below. and there were multiple sets of marks overlapping, as if several people had been there at once. "Could be a photographer," I said, trying to find a rational explanation. "Getting a better angle for a shot. People do stupid things for pictures." "Maybe." Jake's voice was flat. "But these marks suggest weight shifting rapidly, repeatedly, like someone stumbled or was pushed, or was dancing near the edge. None of those scenarios are good." A cold weight settled in my stomach, the same sensation I'd felt that morning. A creeping certainty that something was wrong, even if I couldn't yet identify what. "Are you saying someone might have fallen?" "I'm saying we should check for climbing gear or rope anchors. If someone did go over, either accidentally or intentionally, there would be evidence of a recovery attempt. Standard procedure would be to anchor and rappel down to assess the situation." We searched the immediate area thoroughly, spreading out in a careful pattern to cover maximum ground. No rope anchors, no climbing gear, no signs of emergency activity, no blood, no torn clothing, nothing that would suggest trauma or accident. Either no one had fallen, or if they had, their companions had left no trace of attempting a rescue. Neither option was comforting, because experienced hikers would know to mark the site and attempt recovery. Abandoning someone who'd fallen was not just morally wrong, it was criminally negligent. I radioed base with an update, keeping my voice professional despite growing unease. "Team 1 to base, at Viewpoint Charlie, elevation 3,200 feet. Possible signs of disturbance near cliff edge, but no confirmation of incident. Weather remains clear, visibility excellent. Continuing ascent. We'll radio again at next checkpoint in 30 minutes. We pressed on. The trail grew steeper as we climbed, the switchbacks tighter and more aggressive as we gained elevation. The Douglas firs gave way to mountain hemlock and eventually to alpine vegetation, stunted trees that grew low and twisted, shaped by constant wind and harsh winters. The underbrush thinned until we were walking through corridors of rock and moss and lichen. The temperature dropped noticeably despite the climbing exertion, and patches of old snow began appearing in shaded areas, despite it being mid-October. Up here, winter never fully released its grip. At 9:30 a.m., we found the first piece of equipment. It was Jake who spotted it. A bright blue stuff sack partially hidden under a fallen log, about 10 feet off the trail. The color was wrong for the environment, too vivid and artificial, the kind of detail that catches a tracker's eye because it doesn't belong in a natural setting. The stuff sack contained a water filtration system, still damp from recent use, and a half-full water bottle. The brand matched the gear list we'd been provided for one of the missing hikers, Marcus Webb specifically. This was definitely theirs. The serial number on the filter matched the receipt found in their vehicle. "Why would they leave a water filter?" Brandon asked, examining the equipment. "That's essential safety equipment, especially on a long hike. You don't abandon something like this unless you're in serious trouble." "Maybe they had extras," Emily suggested, but she didn't sound certain. "Some people pack redundant systems." "Or they were moving fast and didn't want the weight," I said, though that explanation didn't make sense either. You don't abandon critical safety equipment on a day hike unless you're in serious trouble or serious panic. A water filter weighs maybe 6 ounces. That's not enough weight to justify abandoning it. Jake was examining the log where we'd found the stuff sack, running his hand along the bark. "This was placed here deliberately. Look at how it's positioned. Tucked under the log, but not buried. Like someone wanted it hidden from casual view, but still accessible if you knew where to look. This wasn't dropped accidentally. Someone took the time to wedge it under this specific log in this specific position. Why hide a water filter? Brandon asked. What's the point? None of us had a good answer for that question. I documented the find with photographs from multiple angles, recorded GPS coordinates, and bagged the equipment as potential evidence. The presence of their gear meant we were definitely on the right track. But the circumstances of the find raised more questions than it answered. Were they marking a trail for us? Were they hiding equipment from someone? Had they planned to return for it later? We continued upward, and the strangeness intensified in ways that made my professional detachment increasingly difficult to maintain. Over the next hour, as we climbed through increasingly sparse vegetation into proper alpine terrain, we found 3 more items. Each discovery was more unsettling than the last. A headlamp with full batteries, positioned on a flat rock, facing up the trail like a marker or a beacon. Its lens perfectly clean, despite being left outdoors. An energy bar wrapper folded precisely into a small square and placed in the exact center of the trail, weighted down with a pebble so it wouldn't blow away. And most disturbingly, a knife, a quality fixed blade knife, driven point first into a tree trunk about chest height. The blade sunk deep enough that it would have taken significant force to embed it. Each item was from the missing hiker's gear, verified against the inventory lists their families had provided. Each item had been placed deliberately, carefully, not dropped or lost in panic, and each placement felt like it meant something, though what that meaning was remained unclear and troubling. "This is a trail," Jake said finally, his voice tight with tension I rarely heard from him. "They're leaving us a trail. Breadcrumbs." "But why?" Emily asked, voicing the question we were all thinking. If they needed help, why not just use their emergency beacon? All 3 of them had personal locator beacons according to their gear list. Those things are designed for exactly this situation. Push a button and rescue services know your exact location. Why leave cryptic markers instead of using the technology specifically designed for emergencies? I checked my GPS unit and radioed base, my mind working through increasingly disturbing possibilities. Team 1 to base. We're at elevation 4,100 feet, approximately 2 miles from summit. We've recovered multiple items belonging to the missing hikers, all deliberately placed as if marking a trail. Gear includes water filter, headlamp, knife, and personal items, requesting you attempt to ping their emergency beacons immediately. Static crackled over the radio for longer than usual. Then the dispatcher's voice came through, tense and uncertain, in a way that made my stomach drop. "Team 1, be advised we've been attempting to contact their PLBS since initial report this morning. All 3 beacons are showing as offline, not just inactive or untriggered, but completely undetectable by satellite network. It's as if they were never activated or were physically destroyed." "All 3? I asked, hearing my voice rise slightly, despite my attempt to stay professional. "What are the chances all 3 beacons fail simultaneously?" "Effectively 0, the dispatcher said. "Personal locator beacons are designed to be nearly indestructible. They're waterproof, shockproof, designed to survive crashes and falls. Either they were deliberately disabled through specific technical knowledge or there's no or. They had to have been deliberately disabled. There's no natural failure mode that would render all 3 simultaneously undetectable." The implications hung heavy in the cold mountain air, mixing with our breath that rose in white clouds. People don't disable their emergency beacons unless they don't want to be found. But our missing hikers had filed detailed trip plans and told their families exactly where they'd be. They'd posted their itinerary on their dashboard. They'd signed the trail registry. This wasn't the behavior of people trying to disappear. This was the behavior of responsible hikers doing everything right. Could someone else have disabled them? Brandon asked quietly, his youthful enthusiasm completely gone now. Someone who didn't want these hikers to be found? Someone who needed them to stay lost? It was the question we were all thinking, but hadn't wanted to voice. The mountains are vast and remote, thousands of square miles of wilderness where you can go days without seeing another person, but they're not as empty as people think. There are others out here, people who choose to live off-grid, who have their reasons for avoiding civilization and official contact. Most are harmless, just seeking solitude and independence. But not all. Over the years, we'd encountered individuals whose reasons for being in the backcountry were less benign. Fugitives, mentally ill people who'd stopped taking medication, people running from debt or family or their own demons. Jake's jaw was tight, and I could see the professional assessment happening behind his eyes. The same calculation I was making. If there's another party involved, if someone is actively preventing these hikers from signaling for help, this changes everything. This isn't a rescue operation anymore. This is a recovery at best, a crime scene at worst. We need to contact law enforcement. We don't know that yet, I said, trying to maintain operational focus even as my own unease grew like ice forming in my chest. But we proceed with increased caution. Brandon, Emily, maintain close formation from here on out. Nobody separates from the group, not for any reason. Jake, keep watching the trail for any signs we're not alone out here, and everyone stays alert for anything that seems wrong or out of place. We continued upward, each of us now hyper-aware of our surroundings in a way that went beyond professional vigilance into something closer to fear. And the trail markers continued appearing with disturbing regularity. Another energy bar wrapper, this one folded into an origami crane. A time-consuming task that suggested whoever placed it wasn't in immediate distress. A compass with its glass deliberately cracked in a spider web pattern, the pieces still held in place, but rendering the instrument useless. A bandana tied to a tree branch, knotted in a complex pattern that looked almost ritualistic. Each item belonged to the missing hikers. Each item had been carefully, almost ritualistically placed, and the spacing between them was regular, approximately every quarter mile, as if someone was maintaining a precise schedule of markers. And then at 11:15 a.m., we found the backpack. It was sitting in the middle of the trail at a wide switchback, positioned so perfectly centered it couldn't possibly have been dropped accidentally. The backpack was high quality, a 65-liter Arc'teryx model built for serious hiking, and still fully loaded with gear. You could see the weight of it, the way it sat, low and solid. Jake photographed it from multiple angles before any of us dared touch it, his military training evident in the methodical way he documented the scene. "This is Jennifer Coughlin's pack," Emily said, checking the identification tag after I gave her the okay to approach. According to the manifest her family provided, this should contain her overnight gear, extra clothing, first aid supplies, food, and about 2 liters of water. Then why is it sitting in the middle of the trail? Brandon's voice carried an edge of fear he was trying and failing to suppress. Why would anyone abandon this much essential gear? This pack probably weighs 40 pounds fully loaded. That's not something you discard lightly. Jake was circling the backpack slowly, examining the ground around it with intense focus. No signs of struggle, no drag marks, no blood, no indication of trauma or panic. It's like she'd just set it down, perfectly centered in the trail, and walked away. The placement is too precise to be accidental. People don't just abandon their packs, I said, stating the obvious because sometimes you need to vocalize the impossible to start processing it. Not unless they're in immediate danger or have completely lost rational judgment. A pack is survival. It's shelter, food, water, medical supplies. Without it, you're vulnerable to every environmental threat. Or unless they're being forced to, Jake added quietly. If someone was controlling them, threatening them, they might comply with orders to leave gear behind. I keyed my radio with hands that were less steady than I wanted them to be. Base Team 1. We found a fully loaded backpack belonging to Jennifer Coughlin, one of the missing hikers. It's been left in the trail, appears deliberately placed, no signs of distress or struggle in the immediate area. Requesting guidance on how to proceed. This situation is escalating beyond standard search parameters. The response was immediate and carried a new tone of urgency. Team 1, be advised County Sheriff has been notified of the situation and is treating this as a potential crime in progress. They're dispatching a deputy and possibly a tactical team to the trailhead, but ETA is approximately 90 minutes due to distance and limited personnel. You are cleared to continue search, but exercise extreme caution. If you encounter any individuals on the trail, do not engage beyond identification. Mark your position and withdraw to a safer distance. Your safety is the priority. Copy that, Base. I looked at my team. 3 faces staring back at me, all showing varying degrees of anxiety mixed with professional determination. We were 2 miles from the summit, approximately 4 miles from the trailhead where we'd started. The nearest backup was 90 minutes away, minimum, probably longer, given the terrain they'd have to cover. And somewhere ahead of us or around us or watching us from the tree line were 3 missing hikers and possibly whoever or whatever had caused them to abandon essential equipment and disable their emergency beacons. Every instinct I had, both professional and personal, was screaming at me to turn around to get my team off this mountain immediately and let law enforcement handle whatever this had become. But we were search and rescue. Those 3 hikers might still be alive, might still need help. If we left now, if we waited 90 minutes for backup, any chance they had might disappear with every passing minute. People died in the mountains from delays. I'd seen it happen. We continue, I said, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. But we stay together, we stay alert, and at the first sign of actual danger, not just strangeness but real immediate threat, we extract immediately. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Agreed? They nodded, though I could see the doubt in their eyes. We secured Jennifer's backpack, marking its location and taking detailed photographs. I made the decision to leave it in place rather than carry it with us. If this was a crime scene, we needed to disturb as little as possible. And selfishly, I didn't want any of us carrying a pack that might mark us as associated with the missing hikers if someone dangerous was watching. We continued up the trail, moving faster now despite the steeper grade. The summit was close. The trees were thinning dramatically, and I could see patches of open sky through the canopy. Another 40 minutes of climbing would bring us to the top of Mount Defiance. Part of me hoped we'd find the 3 hikers there, alive and well with some rational explanation for everything. Another part of me, the part that had been doing this work for 14 years and had developed finely tuned instincts about when situations were truly dangerous, knew that whatever we found at the summit wouldn't be comforting. We almost made it. At 11:47 a.m., just as we were approaching what the map designated as the final approach to the summit, my radio crackled with static that resolved into Brandon's voice, strained and frightened in a way that immediately put me on high alert. "Sarah, we've got a problem." I turned to find Brandon and Emily standing about 20 feet behind Jake and me. They'd stopped moving forward and Brandon was pointing at something off the trail, to our right, his hand shaking slightly. In a small clearing, perhaps 50 feet from the trail, and partially concealed by a stand of mountain hemlock, were 2 tents. Not the missing hikers' tents. I'd seen photos of their gear, and these were different, darker colored, older looking. The tents we set up in a configuration that suggested someone had been camping here for more than just a night or two. An established camp with a food hanging system, a defined fire ring, and equipment arranged with the precision of someone who'd been living there long enough to establish routines. And it was occupied. I could see movement inside one of the tents, a dark shape moving against the fabric, too large and deliberate to be caused by wind. "Hello?" I called out, keeping my voice professional and non-threatening despite my rapidly beating heart. "This is search and rescue. We're looking for 3 missing hikers. Have you seen anyone pass through this area?" The movement in the tent stopped abruptly. For a long moment that felt like forever. Nothing happened. The forest was completely silent. No birds, no wind, no sound, except our breathing and the blood pounding in my ears. Then the tent's zipper opened slowly, almost theatrically, and a man emerged. He was tall, maybe 6'2" or 6'3", wearing dark outdoor clothing that had seen better days, ripped in places, stained with dirt and what might have been old blood. His hair was long and unkempt, hanging past his shoulders in matted tangles. His face was hidden behind a thick beard and mirrored sunglasses that seemed excessive for the filtered light under the trees. But what struck me most was his posture, perfectly still, unnaturally so, like a statue or a predator deciding whether to attack or retreat. He stood there, completely motionless, not speaking, just watching us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Sir," I said, maintaining my professional tone, despite every instinct screaming at me to back away. "We're conducting a search and rescue operation for 3 hikers who went missing yesterday. Have you seen them or heard anything unusual?" The man tilted his head slightly, like a bird examining something curious or a predator assessing potential prey. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough from disuse, the words coming slowly as if he'd forgotten how to form them properly. "You're on my mountain." The phrasing sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Not "you're on the mountain" or "you're in my camp," but "you're on my mountain." Possessive, territorial, delusional. I'd encountered mentally ill people in the backcountry before. It wasn't uncommon for individuals experiencing psychiatric crises to retreat into wilderness areas. But something about this man felt different, more intentional, more dangerous. "Sir, this is public land managed by the National Forest Service," I said carefully, using the calm, non-confrontational tone we were trained to employ with potentially unstable individuals. "We have authorization to conduct search operations here. Again, we're looking for 3 missing hikers. We're not here to cause you any trouble or disturb your camp. We just need to know if you've seen them." "They came through," the man said abruptly, his voice taking on a different quality, sharper, more present. "Yesterday, evening time, they were scared." My pulse quickened. Scared of what? What were they scared of? The man took a step forward, and I heard Jake's hand move to his belt where he kept his radio and bear spray. The sound seemed loud in the oppressive silence. "Same thing you should be scared of," the man said, his voice dropping to something between a whisper and a growl. "These mountains don't want people anymore. Too many of you, making noise, leaving trash, disturbing things that should stay disturbed, taking pictures, thinking you own the place." "Where did they go?" I pressed, trying to keep him focused on useful information. The 3 hikers, where did they go after they passed your camp? The man pointed up the trail toward the summit with one arm, the movement sudden and jerky. They went up looking for cell signal, they said. Said their emergency devices weren't working. I told them there's no signal up there. There's no signal anywhere on this mountain anymore. Not since he started jamming it. But they didn't listen. Young people never listen. Who started jamming it? I asked. Who's he? Is there someone else on this mountain? The man's head tilted the other direction, and I realized with growing horror that I couldn't see his eyes behind those mirrored glasses. Couldn't read his expression or intent. I'm him, he said simply. I'm the mountain's keeper now. I'm the one who decides who stays and who goes, and you need to go. Did the hikers come back down past you? I pushed, ignoring his implicit threat. No. The man's voice dropped lower, taking on that same flat, matter-of-fact tone that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Nothing that goes to the summit comes back down, not anymore. Not since I started protecting it. The mountain keeps what it takes now. The way he said it, casual, certain, like he was describing basic physics rather than something impossible, was more frightening than if he'd screamed or threatened us directly. Sir, I need you to come with us to the ranger station, I said, making a decision based on his statements. We need to get a formal statement about what you saw. You may have information critical to finding these missing people. I'm not leaving my camp. The words were flat, final. Sir, I'm not asking. 3 people are missing, possibly in danger based on your statements. You may have been one of the last people to see them. I need you to... The man moved suddenly, disappearing back into his tent with surprising speed. I heard rustling, the sound of equipment being moved around, metal clinking against metal. Jake had his bear spray out now, holding it ready, and Brandon was frantically trying to get a signal on his radio to call for backup. Then the man emerged again, and he was holding a rifle. Not a hunting rifle or a simple bolt action. This was an AR-style rifle, modern and well-maintained, despite his disheveled appearance. He wasn't pointing it at us, not threatening us directly, but holding it across his chest in a way that made his position absolutely clear. The message was unmistakable. You need to leave my mountain, he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly across the 50 feet between us. You need to leave now, before dark, before things get worse. I'm protecting it now. I'm keeping people away. That's my purpose. Base, Team 1, I said into my radio, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart and trying to maintain eye contact with the armed man. We have encountered an armed individual at elevation 4,600 feet. Subject is uncooperative and potentially hostile. Rifle visible, not currently pointed at team members. Requesting immediate law enforcement backup and advising we are withdrawing from current position. Consider this a high-priority emergency. The man smiled then, a disturbing expression that didn't reach his hidden eyes. I could tell even without seeing them. Radio doesn't work up here anymore. Haven't you noticed? You've been out of range for the last 20 minutes. They can't hear you. And you can't hear them. I control communications now. I control everything on this mountain. I looked down at my radio with growing horror. The signal strength indicator, which had been showing full bars all morning, was completely dead. No signal, no connection to base. Just static when I tried again. That's impossible, Emily whispered from behind me. These radios have a range of 15 miles in open terrain. We're not even... Time to go, Jake said firmly, his voice cutting through the rising panic. Sarah, we need to extract right now. This situation is beyond our mandate. The man with the rifle still hadn't pointed it at us, but his grip had tightened. I could see his knuckles whitening through the dirt on his hands. "Good choice," he said. "But don't come back. Don't send others. Just let the mountain keep what it's taken. That's the only way anyone stays safe anymore. I'm protecting everyone by keeping them away." We backed away from the camp, maintaining visual contact with the armed man until we reached the trail. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then we moved as quickly as prudent caution would allow, putting distance between ourselves and that clearing. Nobody ran. Running might trigger a predatory response, but we moved with purpose, every sense alert for the sound of footsteps behind us or the crack of a rifle shot. Nobody spoke for the first 10 minutes of descent. We were all processing what had just happened, what it meant, what we were going to do next. The armed man's presence suggested serious criminal activity. Maybe he was a fugitive, maybe he was protecting an illegal operation, maybe he was just deeply disturbed and living off-grid, but his words, his certainty that the radios wouldn't work, that the mountain was keeping the hikers, that he was protecting something. "My radio's got signal again," Brandon said suddenly, relief evident in his voice. "I'm showing 3 bars full strength." I checked my own unit, my hands still shaking slightly from adrenaline. Full signal strength, just like it had been all morning, as if the dead zone we'd experienced had never existed. The transition was instant. One moment no signal, now full signal. That wasn't how radio interference worked naturally. "Base, this is Team 1, I said into the radio urgently. "Do you copy?" "Team 1, we copy," came the immediate response, and I could hear the tension in the dispatcher's voice. "Where the hell have you been? We've been trying to raise you for the last 30 minutes. Your signals dropped completely off our tracking system. GPS went dark, radios went silent. We were about to send additional teams." So it had been real. The radio blackout had been real, not psychological, not a shared hallucination, not a malfunction. We had genuinely lost all communication in that specific area, exactly as the armed man had said we would, which meant either he had sophisticated jamming equipment or something else was happening on this mountain that I didn't have the framework to understand. I provided a rapid status update, the armed subject, the abandoned equipment, the strange trail of deliberately placed items, the man's claims about the hikers and the mountain. Base's response was immediate and definitive. Extract immediately, mark all locations, wait for law enforcement backup before attempting any further search operations. This was no longer a search and rescue mission. It was a potential criminal investigation. But as we descended, moving faster now with the morning's careful search pattern abandoned in favor of rapid extraction, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that eyes tracked our movement through the trees, that something was observing our retreat with interest or satisfaction or hunger. Several times I whirled around, certain I'd heard footsteps behind us, but there was never anything there. Just trees and shadows and that oppressive silence that seemed to follow us down the mountain. At 1:30 p.m., we reached the trailhead where 2 county sheriff's deputies were waiting, their patrol vehicles parked next to our trucks. We provided detailed statements about the armed subject, described the location of his camp with GPS coordinates, and turned over the equipment we'd recovered. They assured us a tactical team would move up to investigate once they had proper support in place. "What about the missing hikers?" Emily asked, her voice tight with frustration. "We just leave them up there with that armed man?" "We're not leaving them," the lead deputy said, a woman in her 40s with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years working in these mountains. "We're regrouping with proper resources. If there's an armed subject on that mountain who might be connected to their disappearance, we need to treat this as a potential hostage situation, or worse, not a standard search and rescue. You did the right thing by withdrawing. Getting yourselves hurt or killed wouldn't help those hikers. It was the right call, professionally speaking. I knew that. But it felt wrong. Those 3 hikers had left a trail of breadcrumbs, had tried to signal us in the only way they could, with their emergency beacons disabled. They'd needed help, and we'd turned back. "There's something else," Jake said quietly, looking at his GPS unit with a troubled expression. "I've been tracking our route data. The distance from where we encountered that armed subject back to where we regained radio contact. It's only 400 feet, maybe 500 maximum." "So?" the deputy asked. "So radio blackout doesn't work like that. These units don't just cut out completely for 400 feet and then suddenly work perfectly again. The signal degrades gradually as you move into areas with interference. This was binary. We had signal, we didn't have signal, we had signal again, like someone flipped a switch." The deputies exchanged glances. "Radio interference can be caused by a lot of things. Atmospheric conditions, solar activity, mineral deposits, or by someone jamming the signal," Jake interrupted, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "Which means either that armed subject has some serious illegal technology or—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We were all thinking it. Or there was something else on that mountain, something that neither our training nor our equipment was designed to handle. Something that could create localized dead zones and leave trails that made no sense and keep 3 hikers from ever coming home. The tactical team didn't go up that afternoon. The sheriff's department wanted to wait for proper resources, which meant calling in support from neighboring counties and potentially federal authorities if the situation involved armed criminals or illegal communications jamming equipment. Meanwhile, 3 hikers remained missing, and every hour that passed decreased their chances of survival. I went home that evening to my small apartment in the valley, but I couldn't rest. My mind kept cycling through the day's events, trying to find patterns or explanations that made sense. The deliberately placed equipment, forming a trail that led exactly where we needed to go. The abandoned backpack, so perfectly centered it couldn't be accidental. The armed man who claimed to be protecting the mountain, who somehow knew our radios would stop working. The inexplicable blackout zone that shouldn't exist with our equipment. And underneath it all, that persistent feeling of being watched that hadn't left even after we descended. At 9:47 p.m., my personal cell phone rang. Unknown number. My hand hesitated over the screen for a moment before I answered. "Hello?" Heavy breathing on the other end. Not obscene or threatening, but labored, like someone who'd been running or was exhausted or terrified. "Hello?" I repeated, my pulse quickening. "Who is this?" A voice, female, barely above a whisper. "Don't come back to the mountain. Please. We're sorry we led you here. He knows you now. He knows your faces, your names. Just don't come back." "Who is this?" I demanded, sitting up straight. "Jennifer? Is this Jennifer Coughlin? Where are you?" "We tried to leave signs. We tried to warn you without—" The voice broke into a sob. "He's listening. He's always listening. We can't call directly. He monitors everything. But you have to understand, don't send more people. Don't try to find us. It only makes him angrier. And then more people get hurt." "Where are you?" I asked urgently, my mind racing. "Tell me where you are and we can extract you. We have law enforcement ready to—" "We're nowhere," the voice said. And now I could hear other voices in the background, whispering, urgent, desperate, male voices mixing with the female. We stopped existing the moment we reached the summit. There's no help. There's only staying here. There's only being quiet and hoping he forgets about us. Please don't come back, please. The line went dead. I immediately called the sheriff's department to report the contact. They ran a trace on the number. It came back as unregistered, impossible to track, a ghost signal that technically shouldn't have been able to connect to the regular cellular network. But I'd heard that voice. I'd heard the fear. And I'd heard something else in the background that made my blood run cold. The sound of wind through trees, and underneath that, something that might have been footsteps. Multiple footsteps, pacing in circles, like people walking the same path over and over and over, unable to stop, unable to leave. The tactical team went up the mountain the next morning with full tactical gear, communications equipment, and legal authorization to detain the armed subject. I wasn't part of the operation. I'd been officially removed from the case, since it was now a potential crime scene. But Jake, who knew someone on the tactical team, called me at 2 p.m. with the update. They'd found the armed man's camp. It was abandoned, cleared out completely, with no signs of who he was, where he'd gone, or how long he'd been there. The only thing remaining was a message carved into a tree trunk near where the tents had been, the letters cut deep with what must have been a knife. They belong to the mountain now. Don't follow them. Don't become them. They'd found more equipment as they continued toward the summit, following the same trail we'd started. More deliberate placements, more items that belonged to the missing hikers, forming a path that led higher and higher. But no hikers themselves. No bodies, no blood. No signs of violence or trauma, just equipment arranged like offerings or warnings. At the summit, they found the final piece of the puzzle. 3 cell phones arranged in a perfect triangle, all displaying the same message on their cracked screens. We went too far, we saw too much, now we can't come back. Tell our families we're sorry. Tell them it wasn't their fault. The phone's call logs showed dozens of attempted connections to emergency services, to family members, to anyone who might help. But all the calls had been blocked somehow, prevented from completing by something that interfered with the cellular network itself. Except for one, a single call to my personal number at 9:47 p.m. the previous night. The last communication from 3 people who had walked up a mountain and never walked back down. The missing hikers were never found. Extensive searches over the following weeks, using dogs and helicopters and thermal imaging, turned up nothing but more equipment, more signs of their passage, more evidence that they'd made it to the summit, and then what? Vanished? Been taken? Walked into something they couldn't walk back out of? The case officially remains open, classified as 3 adults, missing under suspicious circumstances. The armed subject was never identified, never located, never held accountable for whatever role he played. The FBI investigated the possibility of abduction or illegal detention, but without bodies or witnesses or concrete evidence of foul play, the case went cold within months. But I know something happened on Mount Defiance that October. Something that turned a routine day hike into something inexplicable. And I think those 3 hikers tried to warn us, tried to leave us clues that would keep other search parties away, that would prevent what happened to them from happening to anyone else. Sometimes late at night, my phone will ring. Unknown number. Heavy breathing. And occasionally, if I listen very carefully, I can hear wind through trees and the sound of footsteps pacing in endless circles, walking the same path over and over, unable to stop, unable to leave. unable to do anything but warn others away from the mountain that took them. I still work search and rescue. It's my calling, my purpose. But I won't go back to Mount Defiance. And when new hikers file trip plans for that area, I find myself hoping they'll change their minds, choose a different mountain, avoid whatever it is that waits at that summit. I've suggested alternative trails, pointed out the difficulty level, maybe exaggerated the risks slightly. Some listen, some don't. The mountains keep their secrets, and sometimes the things they take stay taken forever, becoming part of the mountain itself, walking its trails in endless loops, visible only in glimpses and whispers and phone calls from numbers that don't exist. What happened to Marcus Webb, Jennifer Coughlin, and Tyler Bennett? I don't know. But I know they're still up there, somehow. Still trying to warn people away. Still pacing those trails in some form we can't see or understand. Still belonging to the mountain that claimed them. And I know that I'll never fully understand what we encountered that day. The armed man who seemed to control reality itself, the radio blackout that defied physics, the deliberately placed equipment that formed a trail, leading exactly where we needed to go, but shouldn't have followed. The mountains are bigger than us, older than us, and sometimes they remind us that we're visitors in their domain, tolerated, but never truly welcome. Mount Defiance earned its name honestly, and the 3 hikers we tried to find, they're still out there, still defiant against whatever force keeps them trapped, still trying to save others from their fate. But saving people from that mountain means staying away from it entirely. That's the lesson I learned. That's the truth those phone calls keep reinforcing. Some mountains don't give back what they take, and Mount Defiance is just one of them.